I am 60 years old. My son stayed in New York to work. And for 10 whole years he hasn't come home. After my husband and I secretly went to visit him, we pushed open the door and saw a scene. The truth was too shocking. Hello, friends. Although my son has been in New York for 10 years, he used to call and check on my husband and me every single day. But for the last 2 years, his behavior has become extremely strange. Finally, one day, when we secretly went to visit him, a shocking truth shook us to our core. What exactly was it? What was it that made us unable to hold back our tears and make a resolute decision? Please listen carefully to my story. This year, my husband, Robert, and I both crossed the 60-year-old threshold. Our lives can be summed up in one-word content. After so many years of struggling in the business world and building up a considerable family enterprise, we could finally retire peacefully, enjoying our leisure time in a quiet house in a Pasadena suburb, and the greatest pride of our lives, our brightest light, is our only son, Julian. It has been 10 years since he dragged his suitcase to fly to the East Coast for college and then stayed there to work. 10 years have passed in the blink of an eye. For 10 long years, we could only see our son through a lifeless screen. But for me, 800, every evening had become a sacred moment. That was when Julian would video call home. Helen, it's almost 800. Where are you daydreaming again? Robert's voice called from the living room, pulling me back from my thoughts next to the white roses that were blooming most brilliantly. I smiled, quickly wiped my hands on my apron, and hurried inside. My husband was already sitting properly on the sofa, the iPad placed solemnly on the mahogany coffee table, its screen lit up. Waiting. You say that as if I could forget. I grumbled out of habit, but my eyes never left the screen. I wonder if his work went well today. He's looked so thin lately. You worry about nothing. Robert took a sip of tea, pretending to be profound. Doing big things naturally requires a lot of hard work. He's a senior consultant on Wall Street now. Not a little kid anymore. Every one of his contracts is worth millions of dollars. Do you understand? Of course. There's pressure. He said that, but I knew he was even more anxious than I was. At exactly 800, the iPad screen vibrated. Julian's familiar face appeared. My heart skipped a beat. Still the same neatly gelled hair. Still the same gold-rimmed glasses. And wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. Behind him was a massive glass wall overlooking the entire Manhattan skyline. Skyscrapers twinkling. A top-floor office. Luxurious and grand. Just as we had always imagined. Dad. Mom. Julian's voice was warm, tinged with that familiar fatigue. Julian. My boy. I quickly pressed my face closer to the screen, trying to see my son more clearly. Have you had dinner? Is work very busy? Look at you. You've lost weight again. Your cheeks are all hollow. Julian smiled lightly. A professional smile that didn't seem to reach his eyes. I've eaten. Mom. Just a business dinner with partners. Don't worry. I'm fine. I just closed a big deal today. Helping a German tech group with a successful merger. Robert straightened his back, his eyes shining with pride. Very good. What about that project you mentioned last time? The one with those Swiss bankers? Yes. That's also progressing smoothly. They really trust the proposal I put together. We'll probably sign the official contract next week. Julian adjusted his tie. All right. I have to get to another meeting. It's a cross-conference call with the West Coast. Dad. Mom. Take care of yourselves. You. Too. I said hurriedly. Remember to wear enough clothes. Don't work too late. The call ended abruptly, as usual, leaving me with a feeling that was both sweet and empty. The screen went dark, reflecting the aging faces of us two old folks, Robert let out a satisfied breath. You see, our son is truly one in a million. At 30 years old. How many people can achieve what he has? I bet it won't be long before he's promoted to managing director. I didn't say anything. I just quietly tidied up the tea set. I had heard every word my husband said. And my chest swelled with pride. Every time I gathered with friends, I couldn't help but brag about Julian. I talked about his glamorous office, his expensive suits, and those million-dollar deals that I only vaguely understood myself. I became the focus of everyone's envy. Helen, you are so lucky. Your son is so handsome and talented. He's what so many people dream of. Your family is truly blessed. These words were as sweet as honey, soothing my deep longing for my son and filling the emptiness of this spacious house. We lived off our son's halo, off the image of Julian, who was successful and outstanding in that faraway city. That image was so flawless, so brilliant, that it made us believe it was the whole truth. Last week, at a lunch with some old friends, Barbara, whose daughter had just married nearby, excitedly talked about how her son-in-law had personally cooked a birthday feast for his wife. Oh, my girl is just so happy. She beamed. It doesn't need to be some gourmet meal. Just having the family together is warm enough. Her casual remark stung my heart like a tiny needle. How long had it been since our family was together? An entire decade. Julian had never once come home for Thanksgiving. Every time, the excuse was that work was too busy. He couldn't get away. The flights were all sold out. The project was in its final push. We understood. Our son's career came first. We couldn't let our own selfishness hold him back. But that night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. I looked at Robert sleeping beside me, his hair already mostly white. We weren't young anymore. How much longer did we have to wait? When would we be able to touch our real flesh and blood son instead of just seeing him through a cold screen? A bold idea suddenly flashed in my mind. An idea that made my heart pound. The next morning, Robert was reading the paper in the garden. I brought out some tea, sat down next to him, and spoke in a decisive tone. Robert, what if we go to New York to see him? Robert was surprised, taking off his reading glasses. What did you say? Go there for what? That kid is incredibly busy. If we go, we'll just distract him, affect his work. But I miss him so much. My voice choked up. It's been 10 years. We can't just keep waiting. Your hair. My hair. It gets whiter every day. I just want to cook him a homemade meal. To see with my own eyes if he's really doing well. Don't you see him on video every day? Sharp suits. Fancy office. If he's not doing well, who is? Robert waved his hand, but his gaze wavered. That's what he wants us to see. I raised my voice slightly. Long suppressed feelings, suddenly bursting out. I want to know how our son lives when he's not on a call. Don't you want to hold a grandchild? He's 30 years old. Does he not even have a girlfriend? That last sentence hit Robert where it hurt. He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the distant gate. His son's career was his pride, but carrying on the family legacy was also his biggest worry. Finally, he put the newspaper down on the table, his voice deepening. But if we tell him we're coming, he'll just use work as an excuse again. Then I leaned forward, lowering my voice, as if sharing a momentous secret. We don't tell him. We go secretly. We'll give him a huge surprise. What do you think? Robert looked at me. In his aged eyes, a spark of mischief and adventure flashed. A spark I hadn't seen in years. He nodded decisively. All right. It's settled. We'll go give that kid the shock of his life. With an indescribable joy, we quietly began preparing our secret plan to go to New York. However, that peace and anticipation slowly began to crack like fine fissures on a piece of precious porcelain. Faint at first, but gradually widening and deepening. It all started about 6 months ago. My sacred 80 inches the evening ritual began to be broken. Julian's calls were no longer on time. Sometimes he would call an hour late, by which point we would have been pacing the living room anxiously. Sometimes he would just send a brief text, "Dad. Mom. I have a last-minute meeting. Can't call tonight." At first, we completely understood. Robert always comforted me. That's how it is when you're a big shot. Your time isn't your own. But the frequency of last-minute meetings increased. Even when he did call, the call length shortened dramatically. From 30 minutes, long enough for me to fuss over him and see my son to my heart's content, it shrank to only 5 minutes. 3 minutes. And even just a brief 2 minutes. That night, we sat waiting in front of the iPad early as usual. At 8:30, Julian finally called. His face appeared on the screen. But the background was no longer his gorgeous office, but a plain white background like a wall. He was still wearing a shirt, but no tee. The collar open, looking a bit disheveled. "Julian," I exclaimed happily. "Mom thought you were busy again today." "I'm just squeezing in a call," Julian said. His voice weary, his eye sockets were deep, and the dark circles under his eyes were clearly visible even through the high-definition screen. "You've been pulling all-nighters again, haven't you?" I said, my heart aching. "You look exhausted. Is the work pressure really high? Why don't you take a few days off, go on a vacation somewhere?" "I'm fine, Mom," he interrupted me, his eyes glancing away from the screen, a trace of impatience on his face. "The firm is restructuring right now. There's a lot to handle." "Restructuring," Robert chimed in, acting like he knew all about it. "That's a great opportunity for you to show what you can do. Keep it up." "So, okay. I have to go. My boss just called me," Julian said mechanically, reaching to hang up. "Wait," I shouted after him. "Julian, this weekend is your father's birthday. Do you remember?" Julian froze. A flash of panic crossed his face. Dad's birthday. I remember. Sorry. My mind has been... It's fine," Robert said, his tone carrying an undisguised disappointment. "Work is more important. You go ahead? I'll wish Dad a happy birthday in advance then." I'm hanging up. The screen instantly went black. The call duration 2 minutes and 37 seconds. A heavy silence fell in the living room. I looked at my husband. He said nothing, just quietly stood up, walked out onto the patio, and lit a cigarette. I hadn't seen him smoke in a very long time. "Did you see that?" I followed him out, my voice trembling. "He didn't even remember your birthday. Something is wrong with him." "Robert, something is definitely not right. Don't overthink it." Robert took a deep drag of his cigarette, exhaling a cloud of hazy white smoke. He might really be having trouble at work. When we men are under pressure, we usually don't want to tell the family. I don't want to make them worry. He said it to comfort me, and to comfort himself. But I knew his steadfast faith in his son's perfect image was beginning to waver. We no longer discussed our secret trip with the same excitement. Instead, there were sighs and silence. Every night, waiting for our son's call became a form of torture. I held my breath, watching the clock desperately tick past 8:00. Basen Ling. And then 9:00. My anxiety peaked last week. Monday. No call. No text. I told myself he was probably just too busy. Tuesday. Still, that terrible silence. I started to get restless. I sent him a text. "Julian, are you okay? Why haven't you called Mom and Dad?" Wednesday. My message showed read, but there was absolutely no reply. My heart felt like it was being squeezed tight. I called him. The phone rang for a long time. Then went to voicemail. Thursday. I was like a ghost. I had no heart to tend to the garden. Not even my beloved roses. Robert couldn't stay calm either. He kept calling our son. Trying the New York number. Then the backup number. But the result was the same cold silence. What if something happened to him? I collapsed into my husband's arms. Sobbing. The worst-case scenarios flashed through my mind. One after another. A car crash. An illness. A robbery. I didn't dare think any further. It won't. Don't say such unlucky things. Robert shouted. But his voice was trembling. 2. Our boy is strong. Nothing will happen. He must be on a business trip somewhere with no signal. Or he lost his phone. But we both knew this was just a feeble attempt to deceive ourselves. In this day and age, in a developed country like the United States, where could you go for several days without any signal? By the 7th day, a full week with no word from our son. My endurance had reached its limit. I sat numbly on the sofa. My eyes red and swollen from crying and lack of sleep. The spacious house now felt like a giant cage, imprisoning our 2 old hearts. Tormented with anxiety, Julian's sudden silence was like an invisible boulder slowly pressing down, squeezing all the air and life out of us. The halo of the high finance expert, the $1 million deals, the bright future, everything dissipated in this terrifying fog of silence. I can't wait another second. I stood up abruptly, looking straight at my husband. This man who had once been the pillar of our family, who now also looked haggard and helpless. I can't sit here guessing anymore. Robert, I said, my voice quiet but resolute. Whatever has happened, good or bad, I have to see my son with my own eyes. I have to go to New York immediately. This time, Robert didn't object at all. A father's pride, his trust in his son's abilities, all of it had been worn away to nothing during this past week of silence. His eyes held only the pure fear of someone about to lose the most precious thing they have. Okay. He nodded decisively. His voice heavy. I'll go with you. We'll book the tickets right now. We're going to find our son. That night, a terrible storm hit Pasadena. The wind howled outside, whipping the magnolia branches against the glass, making a piercing shriek. Lightning tore across the sky intermittently, casting an eerie blue light into the living room, where we, 2 old folks, sat motionless in front of the laptop. We were trying to find the earliest flight to New York. But my mind was a mess. The letters and numbers danced before my eyes. The earliest flight is 5:00 tomorrow morning, Robert said, his voice thick with fatigue and stress. Connecting through Chicago. Or maybe we should wait until morning, when our heads are clear, to decide. It's the middle of the night. We're upset. What if we make a mistake? No? I refused flatly. I can't wait until tomorrow morning. I feel like if we're 1 minute late, something terrible will happen. Don't scare yourself. My husband sighed, reaching up to rub his temples. We haven't heard from him for a whole week. What difference will a few more hours make? You go get some rest. Look at you. You're exhausted. Perhaps he was right. My body was falling apart, and my spirit was at its limit. I staggered to my feet and went back to the bedroom. But I couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain, the wind, the thunder, all intertwined with the frantic pounding of my heart. I curled up under the covers, trying to find some warmth. But I was still freezing cold. Exhaustion and worry finally dragged me into a fitful sleep. A sleep more terrifying than being awake. And then I dreamed of Julian, not my son in a high-end suit, standing in his glamorous office. No, in my dream, I saw him standing on a vast, Muddy construction site. Letting the torrential rain pour down on him. Mud covered him from head to toe. His faded blue work clothes were tattered, revealing his thin, dark body. He wasn't wearing his intellectual gold-rimmed glasses. His cheeks were sunken, covered in grime. Only his eyes shone with pain. He looked at me, his gaze desperate. Then he slowly reached his hands out to me. Oh God, those hands. They weren't the hands of a financial expert. Not the long, clean hands used to typing on a keyboard and signing million-dollar contracts. This was a pair of rough, swollen hands, covered in calluses and crisscrossing scratches. His fingernails were packed with black dirt. He opened his mouth, trying to call me, but no sound came out. Only 2 streams of hot tears mixed with the cold rain, flowing down his gaunt cheeks. He was crying silently. Julienne, I screamed in terror, bolting upright in bed. Sweat had soaked my silk pillow. I gasped for air as if I had just run a marathon. Outside, the rain was still pouring, the thunder still booming. But none of it could drown out the image of my son's calloused hands and tear-streaked face from the dream. It was so real. Every detail was so clear. It was so painful. It tore my heart apart. That wasn't a dream. It was an omen. It was my son's cry for help. I was utterly terrified. I leaped out of bed, not even bothering to put on slippers. I ran to the living room. Robert was still slumped over the laptop, the faint glow of the screen illuminating his weary face. Robert. Wake up. Wake up. I shook his shoulder forcefully, my voice breaking apart in sobs. He startled, looking at me, confused. Helen. What is it? What's wrong with you? I just dreamed of Julian. I gasped, the words tumbling out. He was on a construction site. His clothes were torn. He was covered in mud. Robert, our son is really in trouble. It's not work pressure. He's suffering. I told my husband the entire dream, placing special emphasis on the hands covered in calluses and scars. I cried as I spoke, my body trembling uncontrollably. Robert held me, trying to calm me down. Calm down. It was just a dream. You're just so worried. That's why you had a nightmare. Look. You're burning up. No, I screamed, pushing him away. My eyes bloodshot. I know it wasn't a dream. I'm his mother. I can feel it. Those hands? Do you understand? Those are the hands of a manual laborer. Those are not our son's hands. The panic and pain in my voice, the desperate resolve in my eyes, seemed to shake Robert. He stopped saying those empty words of comfort. He stared at me, the doubt on his face slowly fading, replaced by a fear even deeper than my own. He believed me. Perhaps my dream had spoken the terrible truth, a truth he had vaguely sensed deep down, but hadn't dared to admit. I have to go to New York right now. I grabbed his sleeve, pleading. I can't wait until 50 inches the morning. I can't sit on a plane for hours, not knowing what's happening to my son. We have to go right now. Whatever flight. I don't care how much it costs. My determination broke my husband's last thread of hesitation. He didn't say another word, just nodded heavily. His trembling hands moved the mouse on the screen, clicking the pay button. Purchasing 2 tickets to New York. A different airline. Taking off at 20 inches the morning. Less than 3 hours from now. On the way to LAX. The car sped through the white curtain of rain. I sat motionless in the back seat, my mind a complete blank. The terrible dream played over and over in my head, like a slow-motion film. The 5-hour flight was the longest 5 hours of my life. I couldn't close my eyes, even though we were in business class where the seats could recline comfortably. Every time I shut my eyes, the image of Julian in his torn clothes, holding out his calloused hands to me, would appear and grip my heart. Robert sat beside me, silent for the entire flight. He no longer tried to comfort me with empty words, but just held my hand tightly, a little warmth transferring from his cold palm. We both understood. We were flying toward a truth we were not prepared to face. When the plane landed at JFK, the sky was just beginning to lighten. The cold, early autumn air of New York filled my lungs, making me shiver. New York spread out before us. Clean, modern, orderly. Glass-walled skyscrapers stood tall, and luxury cars glided silently down the roads. This scene roughly matched what Julian often showed us in his videos. A faint glimmer of hope ignited in my heart. Maybe the dream was really just a dream. Maybe my son had just run into a little trouble, and he was still living in one of those glamorous towers. We didn't go to a hotel. We immediately hailed a cab and went to the address Julian had given us years ago. It was a high-end apartment complex in the city's financial center. Along the way, I stared intently at the crumpled address slip in my hand. "Are you sure this is the right address?" I asked my husband for the 100th time. "He sent it to us. It can't be wrong," Robert answered, his tone firm. But I could hear the uncertainty in it. The cab stopped in front of a tall, luxurious building with an all-glass facade. A doorman in a crisp uniform stood solemnly at the entrance. Everything was exactly as I had imagined. Robert paid the fare and carried the 2 large suitcases himself. We walked into the lobby. The marble floor was polished like a mirror, and a huge crystal chandelier cast a warm glow. A familiar sense of pride swelled within me. My son lived in a place like this. We approached the front desk, where a young blonde man was smiling politely. Robert cleared his throat, speaking in his most fluent English. "Hello. We're looking for Julian Lee. He lives in apartment 2508. The manager nodded, his blue eyes looking at us kindly. "Hello. Please allow me to check the bloss." He tapped away at his keyboard. I held my breath, waiting, my hand gripping the corner of my coat. I imagined he would pick up the phone, call Julian, and in a few minutes, my son would hurry downstairs, first in shock, then weeping with joy. But the manager frowned. He looked at the screen, then back at us, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry. Are you two mistaken about something?" "Impossible," Robert said firmly. "Julian Lay, or son. He's a financial consultant. He works here." The manager looked at the screen again, typed a few more times, and then shook his head. His voice was cold and decisive, every word hitting me like a hammer. "I'm very sorry. Mom. Sir. According to our system records, Mr. Julian Lee, from apartment 2508, checked out over a year ago." A year. My ears were ringing. All the sounds in the luxurious lobby suddenly disappeared. I could only hear the sound of blood rushing to my head. The room spun around me. He moved out a year ago. Then where had Julian been calling us from for the past year? Where was that glamorous office behind him? What about all those stories of million-dollar deals and strategic partners? Lease. The word exploded in my mind. My son had been lying to us. Not just once, but hundreds of times over the past year. This sense of betrayal, of being so blatantly deceived by my beloved son, was more painful than the worry. The fear for my son's safety, intertwined with extreme disappointment, made my legs go weak. I swayed. And if Robert hadn't caught me, I might have collapsed right there in that cold, unfamiliar lobby. "Helen. Are you okay?" my husband cried out, his voice trembling. "Too." I shook my head, unable to speak as tears streamed down my face. Robert turned to the manager, struggling to stay calm. Then do you know where he moved? Do you have any other contact information?" "I'm very sorry, sir. Due to privacy protection, we cannot provide that. I only know that Mr. Lee terminated his lease last August." All hope was shattered. We stood like two fools in the middle of the opulent lobby, lost and helpless. Robert helped me to a nearby sofa. He handed me a bottle of water, forcing me to take a few sips. "Don't cry," he said, his heart aching. "Crying won't solve anything. We have to find him first." I looked at my husband. This proud man. His eyes now etched with pain and confusion. But in that confusion, I saw an iron resolve forming. The Robert who had fought his way through the business world seemed to have returned. He took out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. "I'll call a few old friends. One of them used to do business here. Maybe he can help." He started making calls, his conversations mixing English and his native tongue, patiently explaining the situation, calling in every favor. I sat nearby, half listening, my heart breaking. I looked out the glass doors. The city bustled on, and New York remained prosperous and indifferent. Only we, two old parents from Pasadena, were drowning in despair. Nearly 2 hours later, Robert's phone rang. A friend had found the contact information for Mr. Bland, Dean Petrovich, the landlord who had rented apartment 2508 to Julian. A tiny ray of light finally pierced the darkness. That wasn't a dream. It was an omen. It was my son's cry for help. I was utterly terrified. I leaped out of bed, not even bothering to put on slippers. I ran to the living room. Robert was still slumped over the laptop, the faint glow of the screen illuminating his weary face. "Robert, wake up. Wake up." I shook his shoulder forcefully, my voice breaking apart in sobs. He startled, looking at me, confused. "Helen, what is it? What's wrong with you?" "I just dreamed of Julian," I gasped, the words tumbling out. He was on a construction site. His clothes were torn. He was covered in mud. "Robert, our son is really in trouble. It's not work pressure. He's suffering." I told my husband the entire dream, placing special emphasis on the hands covered in calluses and scars. I cried as I spoke, my body trembling uncontrollably. Robert held me, trying to calm me down. "Calm down. It was just a dream. You're just so worried. That's why you had a nightmare. Look, you're burning up." "No," I screamed, pushing him away, my eyes bloodshot. "I know it wasn't a dream. I'm his mother. I can feel it. Those hands. Do you understand? Those are the hands of a manual laborer. Those are not our son's hands." The panic and pain in my voice, the desperate resolve in my eyes, seemed to shake Robert. He stopped saying those empty words of comfort. He stared at me, the doubt on his face slowly fading, replaced by a fear even deeper than my own. He believed me. Perhaps my dream had spoken the terrible truth, a truth he had vaguely sensed deep down, but hadn't dared to admit. "I have to go to New York right now." I grabbed his sleeve, pleading. "I can't wait until 50 the morning. I can't sit on a plane for hours not knowing what's happening to my son. We have to go right now. Whatever flight. I don't care how much it costs." My determination broke my husband's last thread of hesitation. He didn't say another word, just nodded heavily. His trembling hands moved the mouse on the screen, clicking the pay button. Purchasing 2 tickets to New York, a different airline. Taking off at 20 the morning, less than 3 hours from now. On the way to LAX, the car sped through the white curtain of rain. I sat motionless in the back seat, my mind a complete blank. The terrible dream played over and over in my head, like a slow-motion film. The 5-hour flight was the longest 5 hours of my life. I couldn't close my eyes. Even though we were in business class, where the seats could recline comfortably, every time I shut my eyes, the image of Julian in his torn clothes, holding out his calloused hands to me, would appear and grip my heart. Robert sat beside me, silent for the entire flight. He no longer tried to comfort me with empty words, but just held my hand tightly. A little warmth transferring from his cold palm. We both understood. We were flying toward a truth we were not prepared to face. When the plane landed at JFK, the sky was just beginning to lighten. The cold, early autumn air of New York filled my lungs, making me shiver. New York spread out before us. Clean, modern, orderly. Glass-walled skyscrapers stood tall, and luxury cars glided silently down the roads. This scene roughly matched what Julian often showed us in his videos. A faint glimmer of hope ignited in my heart. Maybe the dream was really just a dream. Maybe my son had just run into a little trouble, and he was still living in one of those glamorous towers. We didn't go to a hotel. We immediately hailed a cab and went to the address Julian had given us years ago. It was a high-end apartment complex in the city's financial center. Along the way, I stared intently at the crumpled address slip in my hand. "Are you sure this is the right address?" I asked my husband for the 100th time. "He sent it to us. It can't be wrong," Robert answered, his tone firm. But I could hear the uncertainty in it. The cab stopped in front of a tall, luxurious building with an all-glass facade. A doorman in a crisp uniform stood solemnly at the entrance. Everything was exactly as I had imagined. Robert paid the fare and carried the 2 large suitcases himself. We walked into the lobby. The marble floor was polished like a mirror, and a huge crystal chandelier cast a warm glow. A familiar sense of pride swelled within me. My son lived in a place like this. We approached the front desk, where a young blonde man was smiling politely. Robert cleared his throat, speaking in his most fluent English. "Hello. We're looking for Julian Lee. He lives in apartment 2508. The manager nodded, his blue eyes looking at us kindly. "Hello. Please allow me to check." He tapped away at his keyboard. I held my breath, waiting, my hand gripping the corner of my coat. I imagined he would pick up the phone, call Julian, and in a few minutes my son would hurry downstairs, first in shock, then weeping with joy. But the manager frowned. He looked at the screen, then back at us, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry. Are you two mistaken about something?" "Impossibly," Robert said firmly. "Julian Lay. Song. He's a financial consultant. He works here." The manager looked at the screen again, typed a few more times, and then shook his head. His voice was cold and decisive, every word hitting me like a hammer. "I'm very sorry, Mom. Sir. According to our system records, Mr. Julian Lee, from apartment 2508 checked out over a year ago." A year. My ears were ringing. All the sounds in the luxurious lobby suddenly disappeared. I could only hear the sound of blood rushing to my head. The room spun around me. He moved out a year ago. Then, where had Julian been calling us from for the past year? Where was that glamorous office behind him? What about all those stories of million-dollar deals and strategic partners? Lease. The word exploded in my mind. My son had been lying to us. Not just once, but hundreds of times over the past year. This sense of betrayal, of being so blatantly deceived by my beloved son, was more painful than the worry. The fear for my son's safety, intertwined with extreme disappointment, made my legs go weak. I swayed. And if Robert hadn't caught me, I might have collapsed right there in that cold, unfamiliar lobby. "Helen, are you okay?" my husband cried out, his voice trembling. "Too." I shook my head, unable to speak as tears streamed down my face. Robert turned to the manager, struggling to stay calm. Then, do you know where he moved? Do you have any other contact information?" "I'm very sorry, sir. Due to privacy protection, we cannot provide that. I only know that Mr. Lee terminated his lease last August." All hope was shattered. We stood like two fools in the middle of the opulent lobby, lost and helpless. Robert helped me to a nearby sofa. He handed me a bottle of water, forcing me to take a few sips. "Don't cry," he said, his heart aching. "Crying won't solve anything. We have to find him first." I looked at my husband. This proud man. His eyes now etched with pain and confusion. But in that confusion, I saw an iron resolve forming. The Robert who had fought his way through the business world seemed to have returned. He took out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. "I'll call a few old friends. One of them used to do business here. Maybe he can help." He started making calls, his conversations mixing English and his native tongue, patiently explaining the situation, calling in every favor. I sat nearby, half listening, my heart breaking. I looked out the glass doors. The city bustled on, and New York remained prosperous and indifferent. Only we, two old parents from Pasadena, were drowning in despair. Nearly 2 hours later, Robert's phone rang. A friend had found the contact information for Mr. M. Dean Petrovich, the landlord who had rented apartment 2508 to Julian. A tiny ray of light finally pierced the darkness. 2 years. My God, we had been living in his lie for 2 whole years. "Why didn't you tell us?" I choked. "It's not like our family is short on money. Why did you have to suffer like this?" Julian looked up, his swollen eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't. You and Dad were always so proud of me. Our friends. À nos relatives. Everyone envied you. I was the pride of the whole family. How could I say that the pride had been fired? How could I admit that I was a failure?" His pride. A pride wrapped in too many expectations and too much ego, had been his downfall. "Those video calls," Robert asked in a heavy voice. "I used up the last of my savings," he admitted. "Once a week." I rented a luxury conference room by the hour in a co-working space. I'd put on my old suit, prepare my stories about work, and call you, just so you wouldn't worry. Just so you could still be proud of me. My heart felt like it was being sliced. This foolish boy. What an agonizing protest. Stressful charade. He must have been performing. Then the savings ran out. His voice cracked. I started to panic. I saw friends around me making a lot of money, investing in crypto. I thought that was the only way out. I thought I was smart. That I had the financial knowledge. I could win it all back. Even more than before. I dove in like a moth to a flame. "And you failed." Robert finished for him. "It wasn't a question." Julian nodded, fresh tears welling up. "I lost everything. Not just my savings. I borrowed money from friends. And then I took out high-interest online payday loans. The interest compounded. I was drowning in debt." "How much do you owe?" Robert asked bluntly, his voice turning colder. Julian took a deep breath, as if summoning all his courage to say the terrifying number. 150美元. Ling ling ling. To pay the interest every month. Just to survive. I had to do any job I could find. Julian said through his sobs. Loading trucks at the warehouses. Day labor on this site. Cleaning restaurants. If someone would hire me, I'd do it. I've been living like this for over a year now. I understood everything. The calloused hands, the thin, dark body, the exhaustion and despair in his eyes. The show was over, leaving behind a naked, shattered truth. My son, my pride, was no longer a financial elite. He was an impoverished laborer, carrying a mountain of debt and a crushing weight of shame. All the glory we were so proud of was just a costume hiding a life of hell. After Julian's confession, the entire humble diner seemed to freeze. I looked at Robert. My husband's face was stiff, expressionless. But I knew that inside a storm was raging. He was a proud man, self-made, who had never bowed his head to anyone. Now his only son, because of a foolish gamble, was deep in debt and had deceived his parents for 2 years. Any father would be furious. I would say harsh, scolding words. I held my breath, waiting for his thunderous rage. But Robert did not. He was silent for a very long time. A heavy, terribly silence. Then he slowly stood up. He didn't look at Julian. He looked out the window, where the workers were still hurrying by. Finally, he turned and placed a hand rough with age on his son's shoulder. He patted it very lightly. Get up. Son. His voice was low and without a trace of blame. Let's go back to the hotel. Just that one simple sentence. No judgment. No recrimination. Julian looked up, his tear-streaked face confused, as if he couldn't believe his ears. I was stunned, too. But in that moment, I understood. My husband's love for his son was far greater than his anger and disappointment. He might be disappointed in his son's actions, but he would never, ever give up on his child. Neither Robert nor I said another word. We just quietly pulled our son to his feet. We took him back to a budget hotel we had hastily booked. Julian followed behind us like a shadow. Sila. That night, he slept on a fold-out cot while Robert and I slept on the main bed. But I knew none of the three of us slept. I tossed and turned, listening to my son's uneven breathing and the occasional suppressed sob that came from his direction. His pain was like a cold current flowing through the entire room, freezing my heart. The next morning, Robert woke up very early. He said nothing, just took out his phone and laptop and sat at the desk. He started making calls, speaking in fluent English. His voice became strong and powerful again. The decisive businessman of the past had returned. He was contacting banks, contacting the lenders Julian had written down on a crumpled piece of paper. Julian huddled on the cot, silently watching his father. I saw in his eyes a boundless awe and gratitude. He was witnessing firsthand how his 60-year-old father, in a single morning, was resolving the entire chaotic, massive burden he had created over the past 2 years. Every call Robert made was like a heavy hammer, shattering the shackles of debt that bound my son. Near noon, Robert closed his laptop. He turned to Julian, his gaze still serious. It's all taken care of. All your debts? Principal and interest. Dad has paid them off. Julian sat up abruptly, stammering. Dad. How I'm not worth it. I'll do it myself. Shut up. Robert interrupted him, his tone allowing no argument. How are you going to do it yourself? By working on that construction site for the rest of your life. We didn't raise you to watch you destroy yourself. He paused, his tone softening, but still heavy with authority. Just consider this the most expensive lesson of your life. Remember it well. Julian couldn't say another word. He just lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. Pack your things. Robert continued. We're going home. On the way to the airport, Robert had already booked 3 tickets back to Los Angeles. When I received the e-tickets on my phone, I was a little surprised. It wasn't first class like when we arrived. It wasn't even business class. It was 3 tickets in coach. I looked at my husband, and I immediately understood his intention. The era of false, flashy luxury was over. This journey was a new beginning, and this beginning had to start on the ground. From the most ordinary, most real place. We sat in the cramped seats in the back of the plane, Julian sitting between me and Robert. For the entire 5-hour flight, none of us said a word. It was a heavy, but not suffocating, silence. In that silence, I could feel my son's shame, my husband's contemplation, and my own grief. But most of all, I felt a connection. For the first time in 10 years, our family was truly together, facing a single reality. No matter how brutal it was, as the plane took off, climbing through the soft white clouds, leaving that chaotic and painful New York behind, I gently took Julian's hand. His hand was still rough, covered in calluses, but it was no longer cold. I leaned close to his ear, and whispered the words I had been thinking all night. Julianne, don't be afraid. We're going home. We'll start over together. My son didn't turn to look at me, but I saw his shoulders give a slight shudder. A single tear rolled silently down his weathered cheek, landing on the back of his calloused hand. It wasn't a tear of humiliation. It was a tear of release and of gratitude. I knew my son felt it. He felt the boundless acceptance of his family. An acceptance that didn't need words or lectures. It was just companionship. A hint to hut. A shared decision to sit in coach. Home is not a place to display your success. It's the place you can always return to, no matter how badly you failed. The plane landed at LAX at dusk. The familiar air of Pasadena, humid and warm, hit our faces. We silently collected our luggage and took a cab home. As the car drove down the familiar streets, Julian pressed his face to the window, watching the passing scenery like a long-lost traveler. The scenery was the same, but the person was completely different. The familiar gate to our house opened. We walked inside, into the home that had been empty without our son for 10 years. But today's return had a different meaning. There was no joyful welcome, no proud showing off. Just 3 tired people carrying a naked truth. The first few days back in the Pasadena house were the heaviest and most awkward. The familiar home suddenly felt too big, too distant. Julian, in his own house, was like a stranger. He was quiet, avoiding eye contact with us. He spent all day cleaning the garden, pruning the trees, doing the manual labor he had never touched before, as if in self-penance, or as if just trying to keep his hands busy to give his mind a moment of peace. Robert and I didn't know what to do either. We didn't dare ask about work or the future. Afraid of touching our son's still bleeding wounds, we just quietly kept him company, cooked him homemade meals, and made sure he ate. The family dinner table, after a 10-year separation, was held in a heartbreaking silence. A week later, Robert called Julian into his study. I sat in on it, too. My husband, in the posture of an investor, placed a proposal on the table. Julian, he said calmly, Dad has thought it over. With your experience and your mind, even after falling, you're still better than most people. Dad will give you some startup capital, enough for you to start a small consulting firm, to start your career over. No. Julian interrupted his father. This was something he would never have dared to do before. He looked up, and for the first time since coming home, he looked us directly in the eyes. His gaze was still melancholy, but there was a new, strange determination in it. Dad. Mom. Thank you, he said, his voice steady. But I can't take this money. The debt I owe you isn't just $150. Ling ling ling. It's a debt of trust. A debt of pride. It's the debt of my 10 years of living a lie. If I take your money now to start over, I'll never be able to stand up straight for the rest of my life. He took a deep breath and continued, his voice strong. I have to stand up on my own. Starting from the lowest position. Starting from 0. No. From the negative number I created. Only then can I truly repay that debt. And only then can I forgive myself. My son's words stunned both me and Robert. We were seeing a completely different Julian. The arrogance of the elite was gone. The weakness and avoidance were gone. In front of us was a man who dared to face his own failure, and who had the courage to start over from the mud. Robert looked at his son for a long time. Then, he slowly nodded. In his eyes, I saw a flicker of new pride. A pride stronger than any he had ever felt before. And Julian was true to his word. He packed all his expensive suits into the back of the closet, put on ordinary clothes, and started looking for a job. The process was more heartbreaking than I imagined. In his early 30s, with a 2-year gap on his resume and no reasonable explanation, he was rejected by countless companies. Every time he came home after an interview, The undisguised disappointment on his face pained me, but he never complained. Finally, he was hired as a salesman by a small trading company, a true entry-level position. A job that even recent college graduates would think twice about. The new work environment was also extremely harsh. His younger colleagues looked at him with curious, judgmental eyes. The gossip behind his back was inevitable. I heard he's that Wall Street guy. What's a Wall Street guy doing running sales? He probably got into some trouble over there. Had to come back and start from scratch. I witnessed it all in his demeanor when he came home. The late-night dinners after running around to clients all day. That exhausted figure. That face weathered by the California sun. Sometimes he would just quickly finish a bowl of rice and sit down at his desk again, studying product materials, planning for the next day late into the night. Several times my heart broke for him. And I told him to just quit. That we could still support him. But Julian would just shake his head and smile gently. Mom, compared to those days on the construction site in New York, this is already heaven. That sentence made me cry. My son had truly grown up. And so, with his own painful experience and extraordinary determination, he climbed step by step. The disastrous failure in crypto had taught him a bloody lesson about risk and the value of hard-earned money. 2 years of manual labor had ground away his arrogance, teaching him patience and empathy. Julian was no longer the salesman who just said nice things. He genuinely listened to his clients, using his knowledge and experience to offer solutions that truly benefited them. He wasn't afraid of hardship, wasn't afraid of being tired. He was willing to drive to the farthest suburbs for one potential client. Gradually, he proved his abilities. From a looked-down-upon employee, he became the department's top salesman. The colleagues who once gossiped about him now came to him for advice. He was promoted to team lead, then to sales manager. He worked tirelessly, as if trying to make up for all those wasted years. 3 years passed in a flash. In these 3 years, I witnessed my son's transformation. From a broken young man, he had found his confidence again. But it was a steady, solid confidence, built on real ability and painful lessons. One day, Julian came home earlier than usual. He told us he had quit. Before Robert and I could be surprised, he placed a document on the table. "I'm ready," he said, his eyes shining with conviction. "This is the business plan for my own consulting company. For the past 3 years, I've accumulated enough experience, contacts, and a small amount of capital. This time, I'm not asking you for money. I only hope to get your opinion and your blessing." Robert picked up the business plan and read it carefully. I saw his hand was trembling slightly. He read for a long time, then looked up at his son, his eyes shining with unconcealable pride. He said nothing, just nodded forcefully. Julian's consulting firm was established. The office was just a small rented room. The initial staff was only 3 people. But it was built with his sweat, his tears, and his iron will. My son named the company Rebirth. On the day the company opened, Robert and I both went, watching my son in a well-fitting suit. One he bought with his own money. This time, confidently and humbly talking with his first clients. I couldn't hold back my tears. I hid in a corner, watching my son, watching his small but hopeful business. I thought of Julian 3 years ago on that construction site in New York. Thin, dark, and desperate. I thought of Julian 10 years ago through the video screen, so fragile in his pride. And I looked at the Julian of today, a man who had been through the storm, fallen to the bottom of the mud, and pulled himself back up, stronger and more stable than ever. That fall in New York wasn't a tragedy. It was a test, a crucible that had forged a new man. Just then, Julian turned and caught my eye. He smiled. It was a truly warm and peaceful smile. That smile was like a thank you, a declaration that he had truly been reborn from the ashes. At that moment, I wept with joy. The tears flowed freely. But they were tears of happiness. Tears of fulfillment. My family had once been broken. But from those very fragments, we had rebuilt a bond that was stronger and more meaningful than ever before. Julian's company, rebirth, grew steadily. My son had truly found himself again. Not just at work, but in life. His confidence now no longer came from designer suits or fancy titles. It came from hard-won experience and the courage forged in the storm. He was no longer that distant image on an iPad screen. He came home for dinner almost every night. On weekends, he took us to the park, to the same tea houses that only we two old folks used to visit alone. Our house finally had the warmth of a real family. With his career stable, Robert and I started a new worry. A sweeter one. His personal life. A change. Most of his peers were married with children. I dropped hints many times, arranging a few blind dates with my friends' daughters. All beautiful, educated girls from good families. Julian politely went to all of them. But in the end, nothing came of it. Those girls, they only saw the successful Mr. Lee of today. They admired his career. But none of them seemed to be able to touch the deepest part of his soul. The part that still held those old scars. However, fate has a way of finding you when you least expect it. That day, Julian went on a business trip to the Hudson Valley to meet an important partner. When he returned, I noticed he was different. He was happier, often smiling to himself, and the lingering melancholic brooding in his eyes was gone. After I pestered him, he finally told me, embarrassed. In his free time, he had been walking through the old town and stumbled into a small riverside pottery studio. He was captivated by the exquisite, rustic, and artistic ceramic pieces. And there he met the studio's owner, Clara, my son. A man who had clawed his way through the calculating world of finance, was mesmerized by a single image, a girl in a simple linen dress, her dark hair pinned up, sitting at the potter's wheel. Her slender hands were gently shaping a lifeless piece of clay. My son said he had never seen such a peaceful and beautiful sight. They talked for hours about pottery, about art, about life. Julian bought a tea set as a gift for us, and also used it as an excuse to get her contact information. A month later, Julian brought Clara home to meet us. The first time I saw her, I had a special feeling about this girl. Clara had a gentle, graceful beauty. But what impressed me most were her eyes. They were clear, intelligent, and sparkled with strength and independence. At the dinner table, when I casually mentioned how hard Julian had worked to rebuild his career, Clara looked at my son with eyes full of love and admiration. After dinner, when it was just the two of us in the kitchen, she quietly said something to me that I will never forget. "Mom," Clara said, deftly washing the teacups. On our second date, Julian told me his whole story, including those years in New York, about the failure and the days working on the construction site. I was stunned. I never expected my son would have the courage to tell a girl he'd just met about the most shameful period of his life. Clara smiled gently. I was surprised at first, too. But you know, Mom, it was that story that truly made me fall for him. Other girls might admire the Mr. Lee he is today, but I admire the Julian he was. A man who dares to face his most painful failure, who dares to cast aside all pride, to start again from the bottom. That is a man who is truly strong and dependable. Hearing those words, I couldn't hold back my tears. I knew my son had finally found the right person. Clara loved Julian. Not for his halo of success. She loved his scars. She loved the resilience he had forged from his failure. Their love was built on truth and understanding, a love that nothing could shake. A year later, a warm wedding was held. No extravagance, no luxury, just family and the closest of friends. watching Julian and Clara stand together, exchanging vows. Robert and I looked at each other and smiled. Our hearts full. The biggest storm of my son's life was finally over. Now it was time for the rainbow. Time flies. Julian and Clara used their own savings to buy a small house near us. The house isn't large, but it's decorated with an exceptional warmth and elegance, filled with beautiful ceramic art that Clara made herself. Today is the weekend, and my husband and I are going to the kids' house for dinner, sitting on the comfortable sofa in their living room, looking out at the small green garden. I feel a sense of completeness and peace I have never felt before. Laughter echoes from the kitchen. I walk over curiously to see, and a sight melts my heart. My son, Julian, is wearing an apron, somewhat clumsily chopping vegetables, turning his head every so often to tease his wife. Clara is skillfully seasoning the soup, laughing nonstop at her husband's adorable clumsiness. The gentle afternoon sun streams through the window, casting a warm golden halo around the two of them, huddled together. It's an ordinary scene, but to me, it is more precious than all the million-dollar contracts, all the high-level director titles. The glamour of a career can be brilliant, but it can also vanish in an instant. Only the warmth of family and the happiness of a home are eternal. I quietly return to the living room and sit down next to Robert. He is also looking toward the kitchen, his aged eyes shining with happiness. He gently takes my hand. We say nothing, but we both understand. We once had a false pride built on lies and vanity. We once fell into an abyss of disappointment and fear. But it was from those ashes of the past that my family learned how to love with forgiveness, how to face the truth, and how to find the real value of life. Looking at the radiant smiles on my sons' and daughter-in-law's faces, my heart is filled with an unprecedented peace. Finally, after all the storms, my family has found true happiness. A happiness that doesn't need to be shown off to anyone. A simple happiness rebuilt from brokenness and love. Thank you for watching. I hope today's sharing has touched you. For friends who haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click subscribe so we can accompany you every day. And let's grow together.